For centuries, knowledge has been hidden in plain sight across the sands of time. Whispers of lost civilizations, cryptic symbols, and forbidden histories have been erased or concealed. What if the truth was never lost, but hidden? Welcome to Eye of Ancient Mysteries, where the past speaks and the future listens. Sit back, open your mind, and prepare to uncover the untold secrets of our world. Let the journey begin now. Office romance. When Ken 678 first saw Mary 97, he was in the Authentic Municipal Housing Complex, waiting in line for the final stage of random introductions. She was 2 spaces ahead of him. Blue skirt, orange tie, slightly puffed white blouse. Everything was like any other female icon. He still didn't know her name, hadn't even managed to study her face. But with both hands, in some old-fashioned manner, she held a folder, and when the line moved forward, he noticed her fingernails. They were red. When the line curved again, she was gone. Ken was intrigued, but quickly forgot about her. It was the busiest time of the year, and he was running like mad from call to task. Later that week, he saw her again while he was taking a break with an open window in the corridor between copies and references. As he passed her, he tilted his folder aside. He had learned that trick. Again, he saw those red nails, which was very curious. Fingernails didn't exist in the alternative menu. In the color menu, there was no red. Ken used the weekend to visit his mother at her house. It was for her birthday, anniversary, or something like that. He hated weekends. He had grown up using the Ken face, and without it, he felt uncomfortable. He also hated his old name, which his mother insisted on calling him. He hated the merciless and frightening things that were outside. To avoid panic, Ken closed his eyes and began humming with his mouth closed. Out here, he could do both things together. He was trying to simulate the peaceful hum of the service, but that didn't replace the real things, and Ken couldn't relax until the week started again and he went back inside. He loved the soft electronic hum of search machines, the lively flow of icons, the matte shine of the corridors, and the sparkling windows with their soothing views of the inner environment. He loved his life and his work. That week he met Mary again, or rather, she met him. Ken 678 had just restored a document folder to hand it over for searching and then for printing. Through the blurred outlines of the icons in front of him, he could see a long line waiting for commercial departing buses. So he stopped in a corridor where the waiting area encouraged him in the high traffic zones. Ken opened a window to place the folder on its lower sill. There was, of course, no air in it, but in return there was a wonderful view. The view was like any window at Microsoft Office 6.9, fake cobblestones and calm cafes with chestnut trees blooming in front of them. April in Paris. Ken heard a voice say, "Isn't it beautiful?" "What?" he asked, embarrassed. It was impossible for 2 icons to appear in the same window, but she was already standing before him, with her red nails and everything else. "April in Paris," she said.
I know, but how?
"I learned a little trick." She showed him her folder, which was sitting on top of his, quite provocatively. "And you did it," he finished, because this was beyond his competence. She had Mary's face, and it was, as it often happens, his favorite face, and also red nails. Anyone who correctly aligns the window will read us as one icon, probably only the correct paragraph. Ken noted, "Please clarify." "The name is Mary," she replied. "Mary 97. I'm Ken 678. Last week you hesitated when you passed by me. Also a clean move. I imagine you did it only because of the price of the introduction. Most of the workaholics here in the city hall are quite unsociable." Ken showed her his own number with the folder, but she seemed to already know it. "How many times have you been to the shopping center?" he asked. "Long enough." "Then why haven't I seen you before?" "You may have seen me, but not noticed me," she replied, raising her hand with the red nails. "I didn't always have these," she explained. "Where did you find them?" "That's a secret. They're attractively clean. Clean or attractive. Both." "Are you flirting with me?" she asked, smiling with Mary's smile. Ken tried to think of an answer, but he was too slow. Her folder flashed. The waiting area was interrupted, and she was already gone. Later, after several periods during the same week, he saw her again and stopped at an open window between copies and accuracy check. He slid his folder over hers, aligned it correctly, and again stood before her, looking at Spring in Paris. "You've learned to be faster," she said. "I had a good teacher," he replied, and said what he had thought about many times. "So what if I did? What if you did? Flirted?" "That would be okay," she replied, and smiled with Mary's smile. For the first time, Ken 678 wished the face of Ken had a smile. His folder blinked, but it still didn't want to leave. "How many times have you been to the shopping center?" he asked again. "Always," she said. Of course she was exaggerating, but in a way it was true. She had told Ken that she had been to City Hall before they installed Microsoft Office 6.9. Before it, the records were stored in the basement. Mary continued. "They were in metal drawers and could be taken by hand. I helped put them all into disks. Input data. That's what they were called. Entry. That was before the neural interface. We stood OTSIDE and accessed them through the keyboard. Then looked through something like a window. They called it a monitor. There was no one in the office. There was no April in Paris. It was added to prevent claustrophobia." Ken 678 calculated it in his mind. How old was Mary? 55 or 60 years old? It didn't matter. All icons are young, and all women are beautiful. Ken had never had a friend in the office, let alone a girlfriend. He realized that he was rushing with his calls and tasks just to walk around the corridors and search for Mary 97. He usually found her in some open window, staring at the pavement, the little cafe, and the blooming chestnuts. Mary was in love with April in Paris. "How romantic it is there," she remarked. "Can you imagine flying down the boulevard?" "I suppose." Ken replied, but he really couldn't. He didn't like such imaginary things. He preferred the real life in Microsoft Office 6.9. He liked standing in the window across from her, hearing Mary's gentle voice and replying in the deep voice of Ken. "How did you get here?" she asked him. Ken told her that he had been hired temporarily, and his documents from the middle of the century had been transferred by a long winding staircase and turned from archival to active. "Of course, I wasn't called Ken back then," he said. "All the temporarily hired icons at that time were gray. There were no male or female. We were neurally interfaced through special helmets instead of ear rings. None of the qualified workers in the office spoke to us. They didn't even notice us. We worked 14, 15 periods a day." "And you liked that," Mary said. "I loved it," Ken admitted. "I found what I was looking for. I loved being inside." And he told her how wonderful and strange it felt when he first became an icon. To see yourself walking around as though your body was both inside and outside at once. "Now it feels completely normal, of course," he added. "It is," Mary said, and smiled with Mary's charming smile. Several weeks passed before Ken gathered the courage to do what he had planned as his move. They were at the window where he had first talked to her, in the corridor between copies and accuracy check. Her hand was resting on the lower sill of the window, her red nails flashing, and he placed his hand on hers. Even though he couldn't feel it in reality, it felt good. He was afraid she might remove hers, but in return she smiled with Mary's smile and said, "I didn't think you were going to do it. I've wanted to since the first time I saw you." She moved her fingers over his. It was almost thrilling. "Want to see what makes my nails red? Do you have in mind your secret? Do you know the overview between cases and taxes? Is that it? Meet me there after 3 periods. Overview was a circular link without windows. Ken met Mary in Select All and followed her in the direction of Insert, where the doors were smaller and closer to each other. "Have you ever heard of an Easter egg?" she asked him. "Of course," Ken replied. "The software surprise hidden in the code. An unauthorized practice missing from the manual. Sometimes funny, sometimes downright inappropriate. Easter eggs are usually you're just repeating what you learned in orientation," she said. "Found and cleared from commercial software through the company of fraudsters and optimists," Ken finished, as he had already exhausted his intermediate supply of information. "Great," Mary replied. "That's exactly where we are." Mary 97 took him to a small room without windows. There was nothing in it except a small heart-shaped table. "This room was erased, but never deleted," she said. "The optimist will miss it. That's why the Easter eggs are still here. I found this by accident. On the table were 3 playing cards. 2 of them were face down. The third was face up. It was the 10 of diamonds." "Ready?" Mary asked, and without waiting for an answer, she turned the 10 of diamonds face down. Her fingernails were no longer red. "Now you try," she said. Ken hesitated. "Don't be nervous. The card does nothing. It only changes the alternative menu." "Go ahead!" Ken reluctantly flipped the card. Mary's fingernails turned red again. Nothing happened with his own. "This card works only for young women," Mary noted. "Clean job," Ken replied, feeling somewhat more relaxed. "There's plenty of it here," she said. "Are you ready?" "I hope so." Mary flipped the second card, which was the Queen of Hearts. As she turned it, Ken heard a thump, thump, and in the room without windows, a window opened. It was April in Paris. Ken saw a gray horse descending the boulevard straight ahead. It wore no horse equipment, its tail and mane were trimmed, and its huge red penis almost dragged along the pavement. "Did you see it?" Mary 97 asked. She stood opposite Ken in the window. Her bulging white blouse and orange tie had disappeared. She was now in a red lace bra. The cups were filled, and the tight elastic straps were snug. The tips of her rounded breasts were rounded and glistening like freckles. Ken 678 couldn't move and was speechless. It was both terrifying and wonderful. Mary's hands were behind her back, unbuttoning her bra. But just as it was about to fall off her breasts, a whistle sounded. The horse had stopped in the middle of the boulevard. It was surrounded by gendarmes waving their batons. The window closed. Mary 97 was standing by the table, wearing her white blouse and orange tie again. Only the 10 of diamonds remained face up. "Why did you turn the other card so quickly?" Ken asked, as he had wanted to glimpse her breasts. "The Queen of Hearts did it on its own," Mary replied. "An Easter egg is a closed algorithm. It chases itself once started. Did you like it? Just don't tell me you're wondering what to answer." She smiled with Mary's smile, and Ken wondered what he would really say. But their folders blinked. The waiting area was interrupted, and Mary had already gone. A few periods later, Ken found her at their usual meeting place, in an open window between copies, and accuracy check, more precisely in the corridor between them. "Did I like it?" he said. "I fell in love with it." "Are you flirting with me?" Mary 97 asked. "And what if I am?" Ken replied, his intimate words almost as good as her smile. "Then come with me." They were already meeting in the review 3 times a week. 3 times Ken 678 heard the horse, and 3 times he expected the red lace bra to slip off. This week, he was close to the greatest happiness he had ever had. "Have you ever wondered what's under the third card?" Mary 97 asked. They were once again standing in the window, between copies and accuracy check. The new week had just begun. In April in Paris, the chestnuts were blooming over the pavement. The cafes were empty. In the distance, a few stiff figures were descending from carriages and getting into them. "Yes, I've wondered," Ken 678 said, even though it wasn't true. He didn't like wondering. "I have too," Mary said, when they met again a few periods later in the windowless room outside of the review. Mary placed her hand with red nails on the third card and said, There's only one way to find out. Ken didn't answer. Instead, he felt a sudden chill. We have to do it together, she insisted. You will turn the lady, and I'll turn the third card. Are you ready? I guess so, he said, lying again. The third card was the ace of spades. As soon as he flipped it, Ken realized something was wrong. He felt something different. It was the pavement under his feet. It was April in Paris, and Ken 678 was walking down the boulevard. Mary 97 stood before him. She was dressed in a sleeveless country blouse and a long, wide skirt. Ken was terrified. Were they in the window? Were they in the windowless room? Where are we? He asked. We are inside April in Paris, not on the border of the window. Inside its environment. Isn't it exciting? Ken tried to stop walking, but he couldn't. I think we're stuck here, he said, trying to close his eyes to avoid the panic that overtook him, but he couldn't. Mary was only smiling with Mary's smile, and they walked along the boulevard under the blooming chestnut trees. They passed by a cafe and turned the corner again, and every time it was the same. The same trees, the same cafes, the same pavement, the carriages, and the stiff figures in the distance never came closer. Isn't it romantic? Mary said. Don't tell me you're surprised. She already looked different, probably due to her clothes. Her pleasant blouse was quite open in the front. Ken tried to look down, but he couldn't. They passed by another cafe. This time, Mary 97 turned around, and Ken was already sitting across from her at a small table on the sidewalk. Here it is, she exclaimed. This Easter egg is more interactive. You just have to find new ways to do things. She was still smiling with Mary's smile. The table was heart-shaped, just like the windowless room. Ken leaned over, but still couldn't look inside her blouse. Isn't it romantic? Mary asked again. Why don't you order something for me? It's time to go back, Ken replied. I'll bet our folders. Don't be silly, she said, opening the menu. Are blinking like crazy. He finished as he had already reached his own level of incompetence. The waiter appeared. He was wearing a white shirt and old-fashioned black pants. Ken tried to look at his face, but that turned out to be impossible. The menu only had 3 options. Walaelk Rawom Hoas. Mary pointed to Arom, and before she closed the menu, they were already in a wedge-shaped classical room, sitting on the edge of the bed. Now Ken could look further down her blouse. In fact, he saw how his 2 hands reached out and cupped Mary's perfect, full breasts. Her nipples were large and brown like toasted biscuits. Through the French windows of the room, the Eiffel Tower and the boulevard were visible. Mary, he said as she helped him lift her skirt. She was smiling with Mary's smile and lay back. Her blouse and skirt rolled around her waist. Below, from the boulevard, Ken heard the intimate thump-thump as she spread her perfect curves freely. April in Paris, Mary said, and her red, pointed fingertips pulled his lower underwear in one direction and... He kissed her sweet mouth and said, Mary! Her fingertips again pulled his lower underwear in one direction, and another kiss on her sweet mouth, and a sigh. "Mary!" And her fingertips pulled his lower underwear in the familiar direction, and he kissed her again on her sweet red biscuit-like lips and said, "Mary!" The gendarmerie whistle blew, and they were back in the cafe. On the heart-shaped table placed on the sidewalk, the menu lay. "Did you like that?" Mary said. "Don't tell me you're wondering." "Something like that." "I love it," Ken replied. "But shouldn't we go back?" "Back?" She shrugged, and he didn't know why she did it. Now Mary was holding a cup with a green liquid in her hands. Ken opened the menu, and the faceless waiter immediately appeared. The menu had 3 items, and before Mary could point to any of them, he pointed to Ho-Us and the table, and the waiter disappeared. They found themselves in the windowless room, and except for a 10 of diamonds, the rest lay face down. "Why do you always want to ruin everything?" she asked. "I'm not." Ken started, but didn't finish. His folder blinked, the waiting area was interrupted, and he left. "Itima's romantic," Ken 678 insisted a few periods later, after meeting Mary 97 again at their usual point, in the window of the corridor, between copies and accuracy check. "Did you love it? Is that why you were so nervous?" "Was I nervous?" She smiled with Mary's smile. "Because now I'm getting nervous," Ken said. "Because April in Paris isn't an actual part of Microsurf Office 6.9. It surely is. It's an internal environment. It's exactly a wallpaper. We didn't expect to find ourselves inside D. More like an Easter egg," Mary 97 replied. "We didn't expect to start a work romance." "A work romance," Ken said. "Is that what we had?" "Come with me, and I'll show you," Mary said, and he did. And she did. And he did it, and she did it, and they did it. He met her 3 times that week, and 3 times the following week, using every moment he could save. The pavement and the cafe still made him nervous, but Ken 678 loved the wedge-shaped classical room. He also loved Mary's nipples, so large and so brown like toasted biscuits. He loved her blouse and skirt, rolled around her waist as she lay back with her perfect curves spread out. He loved the thump-thump sound, the red-pointed tips of her fingers, and her half-down French small panties, which appeared as a new moment. He loved her. In the end, it was a love story. The problem was that Mary 97 never wanted to go back to Microsurf Office 6.9. After the wedge-shaped classical room, she wanted to walk down the boulevard with the blooming chestnuts or sit in the cafe, watching the stiff figures in the distance descending from carriages or getting into them. "Is it romantic?" she said, twirling the green liquid in her cup. "It's time to go back," Ken replied. "I'll bet our folders are blinking like crazy." "You always say the same thing," Mary would always reply. "We need to talk," Ken in 67-8 suggested finally. As usual, this was April in Paris. He was walking with Mary 97 down the boulevard with the blooming chestnuts. "About what?" she asked, turning around one corner, then another. "About various things," he said. "Isn't it romantic?" She asked after they returned to the cafe. "I guess," Ken replied. "But I hate when you say that," Mary said. "I'm missing at work," he finished, because he was always at his level of incompetence. Mary 97 shrugged. "All your own problems," she said, spinning the green liquid in her glass. It was thick and clung to the walls of the glass. Ken felt like Mary was looking through him, rather than at him. He tried to peer deeper under her country blouse, but he couldn't. "I thought you wanted to talk to me," she said. "Yes, I did," he replied, reaching for the menu. "I'm not in the mood," Mary declared, pulling it away from him. "We have to go back," insisted Ken 678. "I bet our folders are blinking like crazy." "Keep going," she said, shrugging. "What? You're missing from work." "I'm not. I'm planning to stay here." "Here?" He tried to look around, but could only see one direction, toward the boulevard. "Why not?" Mary said. "Who will miss me there?" She took a sip from her green liquid and opened the menu. Ken was confused. Had she been drinking all along? And why did the menu now have 4 options? "Me," he guessed. But the waiter had already appeared. At least it was the same one. "Go ahead, do it," she said, and Ken pointed to Hayuas, but she pointed to the new option in the menu as to why. That weekend was the longest of Ken 678's life. Once the new week began, he quickly dived into the corridor between copies and accuracy check, hoping against hope. But there was no open window there, and of course, no Mary 97. He searched for her between calls and tasks, checking every queue in every corridor. Finally, by midweek, he went to the room without windows, ignoring the review for the first time. Mary 97's folder was gone. The cards on the small table were turned face down. Except for the 10 of diamonds. Ken turned over a lady's cup, but nothing happened. He was extremely surprised. Then he turned over the ace of spades and felt the pavement under his feet. He had found himself in April in Paris. The chestnuts were blooming, but he couldn't feel it. There was only a gloomy sadness. He turned toward the first cafe, and there she was, sitting at the heart-shaped table. "Look who's here," she said. "Your folder is gone," he replied. "But when I returned to the room, it was blinking like crazy. But that was before the weekend. Now it's gone. I'll never go back there." Mary shrugged. "Something happened to me. Do you remember when you found what we were looking for? Anyway, I found it. I like it here." Mary pushed the glass with the green liquid toward him. "You might like it too," she said. Ken didn't answer. He was afraid he'd start crying, even with Ken's own tears. "But it's all okay," said Mary 97. She even smiled with Mary's smile. She took a sip from the glass and opened the menu. The waiter appeared. She pointed to our home, and Ken somehow remembered that this was the same as before. In the classic wedge-shaped room, he completely managed to peek under Mary's blouse. Then his hands covered her full breasts for the last time. Through the French window, he could see the Eiffel Tower and the boulevard. "Mary," he said, and she lay on her back, her blouse and skirt twisted around her waist, and somehow he remembered that it was the same as before. He heard the intimate thump, thump, coming from the boulevard. She spread her perfect things and said, "April in Paris." The red, pointed tips of her fingers pulled down her small French panties, and Ken somehow knew that this had happened before. He kissed her sweet red cookie lips. "Mary," he said. She pulled down her small French panties, and he somehow knew this had happened before. The gendarmerie whistle shrieked, and they were back on the sidewalk in front of the cafe. The menu was on the heart-shaped table. "Are you flirting?" Mary asked. "How sad a joke she's playing on me," thought Ken 678. He tried to smile, even though Ken couldn't have a smile. "You're thinking of an answer," she continued. "What will happen if I have it?" Mary took another sip from her green liquid, then happily spun the green liquid in the glass. It didn't matter how much she drank. It always stayed full. "It's time for me to go back," said Ken. "My folder will be blinking like crazy. I understand. It's all right. Come and see me sometimes," she asked. "And don't say you're wondering." Ken 678 nodded in agreement. Even though Ken couldn't make the gesture, he was as tense as a bowstring. Mary 97 opened the menu. The waiter arrived and he pointed to Hoyuas. The next 2 weeks Ken 678 spent working like crazy. He was completely immersed in Microsoft Office 6.9. As soon as his folder blinked, he went out for a call, tripled tasks, moving fast through the corridors. He avoided the corridors between copies and accuracy check, just like he a voyeur window. Once he almost stopped in front of the painfully familiar window, but he didn't build it in Paris, so in Paris. It was so lonely to it without Mary. 4 weeks passed before Ken 678 returned to the room without windows. Through the review, he was afraid to look at the cards on the heart-shaped table. But the cards, along with her, were gone. He noticed that the inscriptions on the wall had been erased. Probably they had gone through the optimizer. It seemed the entire room had been wiped and then reprogrammed. When he left, he felt only lonely. He was deeply saddened. The following week, he visited the room again and found it full of empty folders. Maybe one of them had been Mary 97's. Now, since the Easter egg had also disappeared, he felt not so guilty for not intending to see Mary 97. Ken was once again free to love Microsoft Office 6.9, free to enjoy the soft electronic hum, the busy flow of icons, and the quiet cues. But at least once a week, he stopped in the corridor between copies and accuracy check and opened the window. Then anyone could find him staring at April in Paris. The chestnuts were blooming, the pavement shining, the wooden figures appeared in the distance. The cafes were almost empty. A lonely silhouette sat at a small table. It was probably her. They say you can never get over your first love. At that time, Mary 97 should have been my first love. Ken 678 preferred to think. He loved to remember her red nails, her gentle voice, and Mary's smile. her large and brown breasts like toasted cookies, and her small, half-pulled-down French panties. The figure in the cafe should have been Mary 97. Ken 678 hoped it was her. He hoped everything was all right with her in April in Paris. He also hoped she was as happy as she had been. He hoped she was wonderfully melancholy. But look, his folder was blinking like crazy. The meeting place was interrupted, and it was time to go.